Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 125 of the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. I'm Tim Robertson, the host of the podcast and also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. Thanks for downloading and listening. The ALPO collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomena, and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, the Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon. You can start by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook. And for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. To find out more, you can go to www.patreon, that's patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. You can go to www.alpo-astronomy.org. And yes, we are also on the Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search for Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy what you hear and want more, you can always subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode of the Observer's Notebook. And now, a very special episode of the Observer's Notebook. Hope you enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this edition of the Observer's Notebook. And I have to tell you, back in June, I received an interesting email in my inbox, and it was titled Reorganization of Meade Instruments, and that really caught my interest. It basically said Orion Telescopes and Binoculars announced today the formation of Meade Acquisition Corp., an affiliate of Orion that has acquired substantially all of the assets with Meade Instruments. And I thought, well, that's good, because I had heard that Meade was in some financial issues over the past few years, and here comes Orion in to swoop and save the day. And we're very lucky to have on the podcast Peter.moreo, the president of Orion and Meade Instruments. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you on. I really appreciate it. Now, before we get into the subject matter, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself? How long you've been with Orion, and your interest in astronomy and things like that.
Sure. My background's in distribution. I grew up in the distribution business, B2B sales, business to business, merchandising, warehousing, transportation, IT, general management, and then kind of segued to e-commerce, first B2B and then B2C sales and merchandising. So that was really my background before I was hired by Orion. I started with the company in July 2007, which is about a year before the crash, right? Where things got really interesting. I was hired as the business guy, the general manager, by the old owners of Orion, which at the time was Imaginova Corp, which was owned by private equity financial investors. And so that's how I ended up at Orion. And in 2017, I led a employee buyout of the company. So Orion today is owned by employees, and we're locally owned in the greater Watsonville area.
Okay, Watsonville is Northern California area.
Yeah, we're about just south of Santa Cruz, so we're about an hour and 10 minutes from San Jose Airport along the coast. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. And what about your experience in astronomy?
Well, prior to Orion, I really didn't have any.
Okay.
And I think that I think the thing that excites me about the hobby or the business is that the seeing people get excited about it, particularly young people. So my daughter's had a few star parties, and watching her friends see, the rings of Saturn for the first time, I think that's to me is when the young people get excited about it. So I don't pretend to be a hobbyist. I'm the business guy that was hired to run the company. But I get excited when other people get excited about it, when our customers are excited about our products and using our products for the solution so that they have a better experience. That's the part of the business that gets me excited.
Yeah, I've been a customer of Orion for many, many years, and I got to tell you, your customer service has always been great. It's never been a problem. So and being a employee-owned business, they take a lot of pride in that as well.
Thank you. Yes. It's been different since we've owned the company. There's 10 of us, and it's a different dynamic, and I think it's been a positive one for the company.
Okay. Now, what sparked the interest to acquire Meade?
Yeah, I don't think we have enough time on this podcast to talk about the entire story, but let me give you the abbreviated version.
All right.
So I've been here, like I think I said, since 2007. So, it was no secret that Meade, at the time was a publicly traded company and had been having deteriorating financial results. So I was aware of that, soon after I started started with Orion. And they were publicly traded, so their financial information was disclosed publicly, whereas most of the businesses in our worldwide hobby are privately owned,
right? And
so there isn't a lot of information about how your competitors are really doing, et cetera. So, but in their case, they were publicly traded, and so every quarter they would disclose, and it was clearly deteriorating. So we were aware of that, and in 2013, they decided to make an attempt to sell the company because they were basically reaching the end with the current situation. And we had always coveted Meade. So the brand, the products, the unique products, the IP, the factory in Mexico, product engineering resources,
right?
The B2B sales network. So Orion's really B2C for the most part, but they have a B2B through a very strong specialty hobbyist dealer network and a distributor network worldwide. So that was attractive to us. And clearly we thought that there would be operating leverage between the two companies because we do a lot of the same activities and have some, the same functional departments, et cetera. And we knew a lot about how to run part of their business. So, we thought it was a great opportunity. So in 2013, while we were still owned by Imaginovo, we attempted to buy the business. And at the time, we were not successful. We were disappointed. But, that's kind of the way it went. But we didn't know what we know now, which is that the defendant and the co-conspirator had illegally gotten together and acquired the business, which we learned about over the subsequent years, and it came out at trial with our antitrust trial in November 2019.
Oh my!
So we discovered what had happened, and that clearly what had happened in 2013 wasn't on the up and up. So anyway, so we had always had an interest in acquiring Meade.
Okay. All right. Now, what changes are you making or have you made in the organizational structure of Meade?
Well, I think that a little bit that's important before I answer that is to understand kind of how the whole thing went down.
Okay.
Because I think that there's some misconceptions maybe in the market. So after we won our jury verdict in November 2019, the defendant immediately put the company in December into bankruptcy. And I think a lot of people, including myself, are not familiar with the Chapter 11, bankruptcy process. It's very detailed. Nothing about it is simple or easy. And through that process, the creditors committee, of which Orion was the largest creditor, We, tried to sell the company. And unfortunately, there really weren't any serious offers for it. I think they were scared off by Meade's historical problems, both financial and operational. Also, this was happening during COVID, so it just made due diligence or investigation and stuff really difficult for everybody. And also, there was significant supply chain risk in that the defendant was the largest supplier to Meade, and there was concern that that relationship might not continue in a positive way, which turned out to be true. So you kind of had all that going on, and at some point, we were either going to have to liquidate the company, or Orion was going to have to take it over and reorganize it. So that's kind of the dirty of what happened.
Okay.
I think that there's a lot of misconceptions, and maybe people have half the story and stuff. But it was really there was two choices: liquidate the company, which I think would have been very unfortunate, or Orion had to step up and reorganize the company in bankruptcy. So we chose to step up, and in our case, since we'd been through this antitrust lawsuit, which was really about competition and the lack of, and the illegal behavior of the defendants, to see Meade exit the market just didn't sit well with us. And clearly we'd been interested in the assets, et cetera. But so that's kind of how we got to where we are. And so effective June 1st, we took over the company through the reorganization process.
Okay. All right. So what were your next steps in that reorganization?
Yeah, so we've been sprinting since we took over. Very exciting. We're running two companies now. The first thing is trying to figure out the right investments and trying to start making positive changes as soon as we can. So I think it's fair to say that Meade had some customer support, perception, reality deficiencies, I think is probably a nice way of putting it. There was also some quality assurance issues, et cetera. So those are a couple of the first ones that we've started to, we've taken some steps to start to address. We are hiring people on the customer support side and getting them furiously trained so that we have just more resources around that. Second, we've invested in tools so that we are better able to respond to, track, et cetera, customer communication, new IT, email, chat, phone systems, et cetera. So a combination of personnel and tools, those are steps that we've already got in process. On the quality assurance side, this is more difficult and is going to take longer, but we started the process with our own factory to figure out what's the customer feedback, where are the problems, where are the problems originating, and how do we start to identify, track, and fix problems. So this is going to take a while, but we acknowledge that it's a problem and we're working on it.
Okay.
The third thing, which is huge, is we have to reboot the supply chain. As you may be aware, the worldwide supply chain, not only just for astronomic products, but in general, is very pinched right now because there's a shortage of a lot of things. There's a shortage of raw materials. There's a shortage of steamship capacity. Containers are in the wrong place. There's a lack of over-the-road capacity, et cetera. So the whole supply chain has been stretched. And in the case of Meade, we're having to reboot the supply chain and replace, some of the key vendors in order to secure the tooling and parts and stuff we need in order to be in full production. So that is really, one of our top priorities. And so that just kind of dovetails into the factory in Mexico. Has been there for a number of years. We've got a number of opportunities to improve it, and we're working on that as well. And then I think that the last thing is that we're working on product development, right? what are we going to do? What's new? How do we bring it to market? When can we start doing this? And so I would say that those are the kind of the top 5 investment areas that we're working on. And we've got our hands full.
All right. Well, as a consumer, once we've got the product, we are concerned about service and warranty issues as well. How are those things being handled?
Very good question. So on the service side, as I just mentioned, we are hiring more people and training them so that we have more Meade people who are doing product support, who can answer end user customers and also dealer inquiries and distributor inquiries. And as part of that, we're updating the tools and adding more tools so that we can, better receive, track, respond to customer inquiries.
Okay.
So as I mentioned, that's in process, and we're building that out, and that's happening today. On the warranty side, it's a little bit more interesting in that, because the company was in bankruptcy and we acquired the assets and not the liabilities, technically we're not responsible for the warranties. With that said, we're going to try to do what is, the right thing here. So past warranties, we're making every effort. We're going to support them. If product is out of warranty, then we're going to make commercially reasonable efforts to try to support those products. We realize there's a significant established group of Meade customers, and some of them are going to have problems, and we want to support them. So, we're working through it. We've got the processes set up almost in order to be able to receive product back that needs to be fixed, whether it's in warranty or out of warranty, and get it turned around. So a lot of that stuff's about to get turned on in the next week or two. And then I think we'll be able to slowly start ramping that up so that, we're fully supporting the Meade products.
Okay. Now, Meade's facility is here in Southern California, correct?
Well, it was.
Okay.
But it's not anymore.
Okay. I didn't know if you guys had moved it or okay.
So we have relocated the business up to Watsonville, where we are.
Okay. That makes sense.
And we have consolidated it with Orion's office and additional warehouse space up in Watsonville. So the Irvine office and warehouse has been closed.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering, because you're the president of both, if you were making that commute between the two. But no, that's good that everything is centrally located.
Well, and the Meade employees were working remotely already, virtually, and so they're continuing to work virtually.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, are they? Do you consider them still two separate companies?
Yes. I think that they're going to remain separate for quite some time. Part of
because
that
of the brand.
Well, yes. I want to start with the good news. Yes, it's the brand, but also there's legal stuff. And whether it's because of the bankruptcy, because of tax reasons and stuff, the two companies have to stay separate. But clearly we're going to keep the brand separate. And so I think that there's been some speculation about what we would do and not do. And here's what I can tell you. As an example of something that we're not going to do, Orion is not going to get ACF telescopes. Right, those are Meade branded products. Those are Meade products, and we're not going to make an Orion version.
What do you mean by ACF? Just
the Schmidt Casses.
Okay.
The Orion, the Meade Schmidt Casses, which the version for Meade are ACFs. And Coronado, for example, is an important product line and brand, and it's going to keep the solar telescopes and stuff. At some point, will there be some changes and stuff? Yes, but we've got so many opportunities, which is what is part of the exciting thing about this whole thing, is there are so many opportunities to leverage the capabilities of Meade to develop and implement new products and stuff that I think we're going to have plenty to do. So anyway, so we're going to keep the brand separate. Meade has to make money on its own. It's got its own profit and loss statement, and we need it to make money so that we have profits to invest in the company, to do the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, a lot of amateur astronomers that I've talked to, there are a lot of Meade loyalists out there too who are really excited about this move. So it's I don't know what kind of customer feedback have you received from it?
Well, I think, to be fair, I think there's been a lot of very positive feedback, and there's a lot of hope that Meade is not only going to survive, but is finally going to start to prosper, and and get back to being a market leader in this category. But I think it's only fair that there is some skepticism. There's people there are like, okay, let's wait and see what happens. So I would say a lot of positive feedback and some, and I think it's probably fair. Wait and see. Let's see what's going to happen. And I can understand that. But I think it's been very positive because I think people want to see not only the brand, but the products, the company remain as a viable competitor in the market. Okay.
All right. How has this affected Orion, the people at Orion, things like that?
Well, we've been doing two jobs for a while now. Before, during the bankruptcy, as part of the planning, and then now post since the acquisition. So we're running two companies now, not just one. So I think people are feeling a little pinched, a little stretched. It's probably a nice way of putting it. I think there's excitement because most of the employees know we tried to buy the company earlier. Employees are familiar with the antitrust litigation. They're excited about the possibilities of the Meade products. Also, Orion plays really in the beginner and the intermediate space. We have some products, our bigger go-to Dobbs, some of our refractors, a few of our cameras and stuff that are in the advanced space, but Meade really is in that space, right? With the big OTAs, Coronado, their mounts. So they really get into the advanced and expert customer segments more so than Orion does. And I think that the Orion employees are excited to have, our own brand to be selling to our customers, those products as well. So I think that the excitement about the technology and the opportunities has been really good with the Orion employees.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned Orion's place in amateur astronomy, and I have to tell you, one of the things I like about your website is that it not only has items for sale, but the number of educational links to help new and even experienced amateurs in a number of areas. I mean, it's great. You have stuff, how to do astrophotography and everything on there. So your website is really a great resource for amateurs. And for those listeners that haven't been over there to other than look at products, go over there and check out the information that's available on the Orion website as well, because it's very, very, very informative.
Thank you. So we have that community tab where a lot of the content is.
Right.
And, we want people to have a good experience with our products, right? And we want them to have a good experience with the hobby. And so I think it's the burden is upon all of us in the industry to figure out how do we help people, really maximize their enjoyment in the hobby. And to the extent that Orion has quite a few customers who are, beginners, or they get their first product as a gift. We want to find ways to help them get started so that they're successful, so that they stay with the hobby, and we can increase the size of the market and the number of customers and people who are enjoying the hobby. So I think that content is an important part of us trying to contribute to that.
Yeah, you're doing a good job of it. You really are. I point a lot of
Thank
people
you.
when they come to me and ask me, what type of telescope should I buy my grandson? Well, here's a website that has telescopes for sale, but they also have information on how to pick a telescope.
Yeah, that's important. Thank you.
It is, yeah. Now, what are some of your current concerns? I know the number one is probably the pandemic issues with not only, say, you have people working from home full time, but also how it has affected your supply chain. Because everybody's trying to buy telescopes right now, and nothing's out there.
Yeah, I think that the hot and it sounds the hobby benefited from COVID, and it sounds bad to say that, but it between last year, right? We had the SpaceX launches, we had the Comet,
right,
and we had more people who were working from home. Air travel was reduced. A lot more people were having staycations. They were doing more driving vacations. And I think a lot of parents or families were looking for, STEM related educational things to do at night that was healthy, that was outdoors, that didn't involve electronics maybe. So I think on the beginner side, there was a big infusion of people into the hobby, and that increased demand. And then I think the hobbyists, found that they were at home as well, and they were looking for the same thing of, what am I going to do at home because I'm not traveling and stuff. So that kind of both segments increased their demand last year, and the industry really couldn't adapt to that demand because of the lead times. And then, you have had COVID outbreaks overseas. You've got worldwide shortages of raw materials, labor issues, foreign exchange challenges, and you wrap all that up, and the demand has been much stronger than the supply. And I don't think that's the supply issue. I don't think is going to get corrected until maybe after March 2022.
Really?
And the only thing that would change that if there's a significant softening of demand. And granted, things have slowed a little bit this summer because the compares versus last year are so strong. But there is a fair amount of robust demand right now that has continued, and I don't think that the supply chain is going to catch up anytime soon.
Yeah, it's crazy. I go on Cloudy Nights, the website where they have a great classified section on there and stuff, and you'll put something on Cloudy Nights, and that day you can sell it. It's amazing. The demand for used equipment right now as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's no different than in the car market, right? That used cars are at the highest percent of, versus a new car today. And I think you see that in the used market for astronomy equipment as well, because the demand, again, is so much stronger than supply right now.
Yeah, my wife and I are RVers. And so the whole RV industry is really going crazy right now because people are working from home. Now they're realizing they can work remotely from anywhere.
Well, and every RV should come with a telescope.
Funny
right?
you should say that, because lately when we've gone out, I see more and more people with telescopes at night at their campsites. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. I think that was only star parties before. Now it's
I think that whether it's a telescope or at least minimum binoculars. I think that was one of the factors that helped drive demand last summer. Is that I can't prove it. I don't have, firsthand data, but it feels like that maybe that helped spur, whether it was camping, RVing, et cetera, is that more people were outside and figuring out, hey, you know what? I got this great opportunity to look up at the sky, and I need some equipment to do that, right?
And like you mentioned last year, the Comet really, Neowise really helped it out as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So other than the pandemic having to do with supply chain, so you said you see probably March of next year is when things might be loosening up a little?
Well, I think that the challenges for the holiday, right, which is November, December of this year, right, for product to be available for shipment, that means it needs to be manufactured no later than October, traditionally, in order to get to in the supply chain, to get to a distributor, to get to a retailer. Well, we already know that, shipments are already booked well past that, which suggests to me that getting capacity to move freight is going to be challenged all the way through the holiday. And then you get into first quarter of next year and you've got Chinese New Year, you're going to have shutdowns and a whole bunch of other things.
Right.
The economy is strong. The worldwide economy is strong. And, there's this shift from goods back to services and stuff. But as we mentioned, the demand for products remains strong. So I don't think things are going to significantly improve before end of March unless something happens with demand.
Okay. All right. Now, what do you think? I mean, saying all that, what's your opinion of the current state of amateur astronomy?
Oh, I think it's very positive. I think that we are very fortunate that the sales results from last year opened the window or the door, whatever you want to call it, to a lot of new users. And I think that those folks who bought telescopes, binoculars, and kind of got a taste of the hobby, and then, clearly with SpaceX and then Bezos and Branson, right? To the extent that they're keeping, space flight in the news, in the regular media every month or so, that's good. And so when you get people talking about this, the hobby, or at least talking about space, that's good for the hobby. And I think that the potential demand or people coming into the hobby is in a really good place right now. And then I think that as the technology is advanced, that there's just going to continue to be technological improvements in the equipment that is going to make it more powerful, more useful. It's going to make certain aspects of like imaging easier. And I just think that that's all really good. So I think we should be excited about the outlook for the hobby for standing here today on July 30th or so?
Yeah. Now you talk about new customers coming in. Do you have a profile of what the new customer is? I mean, is it an over 60 guy who now has some disposable income and isn't working regularly anymore that can afford to do this? Or is it new people, young people getting into it? What is your gut feeling on the new customers coming into the hobby?
So we think it's both.
Okay.
So there's the first group that you mentioned is somebody like my profile that grew up with Apollo and a little different, maybe has an engineering background or a math background, had an interest in astronomy all along, and is now at a place in life where maybe they have more time. And so the comment of last year and the work from home and stuff may have spurred them to, actually get out and buy a first telescope. And that's clearly a profile of some level of the interest in the hobby. And then the second one was clearly people, young people who received gifts. It was a family related product. And those are younger people that are getting exposed to the hobby. Hopefully those people are going to stick with it.
Right.
I think that the first group is more likely because they're at a different place in life. They have, some economic means potentially to buy equipment, and they have more free time and flexibility. It's important that those kids who are getting exposed to it through their families and stuff, hopefully they're going to discover a lifelong love of astronomy. And I guess we'll find out over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and that has been the struggle in amateur astronomy that I've seen. The Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, their average age is 65. It is the older generation. I'm 65, can't say the older generation. It's that generation of individual, and trying to get younger people in to stick with it is really tough. And I even know in our local astronomy club here in Ventura County, it's the same thing. I mean, kids will come in if it's part of their college class that they have to get extra credit, and then we don't see them again. How do you plant that seed and hook that, in their mouth to keep them in the hobby? How do you do that?
So I think it's outreach, and one of the challenges,
almost impossible to do right now.
Well, sure. Just, it's much more challenging now, but, the reality is that the companies selling the stuff have to make more money so they can invest in the outreach, because I believe this for a while. There's been a number of efforts within the industry to try to do some things and stuff. And one of the barriers ends up being the money, the ability to to invest in outreach without a clear ROI on that investment, just because it's the right thing to do and it feels like it's the right thing to do. But that takes, bandwidth, resources, money, etc. And, hopefully Orion will be in a position along with me to do more of that. But that's been my, I've been saying this for 10 years.
Yeah, well, I hear you on that too. It's a tough thing. I think we're all in the hobby are struggling with is how do we find our replacements? The people to do the work once we're no longer doing it. Yeah,
and so the great news is that we have a lot of dedicated people, at ALPO and others who do outreach, and they'll set up telescopes in the park and they'll host star parties and stuff.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that the business side of it has to help in more of a scale mode, and that's kind of where I'm coming from. We're very appreciative of all the volunteers who do outreach, and they do a tremendous job. I just think we need more of it.
Yeah. That sounds good. So, grabbing your crystal ball, what do you see for the future of innovations in astronomy, in telescopes and imagers and things like that? Not giving away any of your future plans that you have down the road, but what do you see as some of the exciting things to come along for the amateur astronomer?
Well, I'll just give you the easy answer. The technology is advancing, right? So the capabilities are just going to continue to increase. I think the desire to make things easier, whether it's imaging to make it faster, et cetera, that's just going to continue to accelerate. The chip developments, making the imaging cameras, the telescopes more powerful. There's advances in manufacturing. So I think things are just going to continue to get more exciting. My hope is that I think we're on a good path. I think that the industry's on a good path, and more innovation is great. And Orion and Meade want to contribute to that.
Well, that sounds great. So, Peter, you have anything else you'd like to add and talk to our listeners about?
Yeah, just the final thought. Actually, Meade's going to celebrate its 50th anniversary next year.
Oh.
And that hadn't occurred to us until about 2 weeks ago. And only because Orion's celebrating its 46th this year. And I was like, well, what's Meade doing? Because I knew Meade was slightly older than Orion. So anyway, we're gearing up for that. We're starting to make plans. We've got some exciting ideas, nothing that we can talk about yet.
Okay.
But I think it could be a really exciting year with some new innovation, some new things from Meade. It's an exciting time, but we're only 8 weeks into this acquisition. We've got a lot to do, but we're making a lot of fast progress. And I think that a year from now, we're going to be in a really good spot, and it'll be good for the hobby. There'll be more competition and more products, more choices for customers. And I think all of that's good.
Great. Well, maybe when you can talk about the plans for the anniversary, you can come back on the podcast and share them with our listeners.
I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Great. And
I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just as a side note, the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers next year will be 75 years old. So we will be celebrating that as well. Yes.
That's a big deal. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You were saying? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank ALPO. You've already kind of mentioned some of the activities you guys do, but it's the outreach you do, the educational processes and stuff are very much appreciated. And I wanted to make sure you guys understood that Orion and Meade very much appreciates your contributions to the hobby.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. We really appreciate that. And I wish you all the luck in getting this acquisition ironed out and everything working smoothly with the two companies and for the future.
Thank you, Tim. It was nice to chat with you. Bye now.
Bye. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook. I really want to thank Peter.moreo from Orion and Meade for coming on the podcast today and giving us a real in-depth conversation about what their plans are and the acquisition. I wish them a lot of luck. We upload new episodes of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please rate and review us. I really appreciate it. And you can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and that little box that sits in your house, the Amazon Echo. You can help support the podcast by donating to it via Patreon by giving up to $35 a month, where you will receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Seidentop and Michael Moyer, for their continued generous support of the Observer's Notebook. Thank you very much. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. If you'd like to get a hold of me, my email address is cometman@cometman.net or on the Twitter at ObserversNBpod. Until next time, my hope is you always have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.